What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another fantastic, lively, and exciting episode of OC and TJ. It is the final picks episode of the regular season, which is both very exciting because the playoffs are around the corner, but it's also sad at the same time because, the season flew by so fast. But it's your boy OC. We're right back at it on YouTube, and let's just jump right into it. We got Saturday night festivities. We got two games going on that day. The first one being between the Baltimore Ravens and the Cleveland Browns at M&T Bank Stadium. That will be at 4:30 p.m. And this pretty much looks like a lopsided matchup from the beginning because all Baltimore needs is one more victory to win the AFC North. And it looks like they're going to get it because the Cleveland Browns are just flat out abominable. They're 3-13. They lost 20-3 to a Dolphins team that didn't have Tua Tagovailoa. And I mean, there wasn't anything in this game that was too surprising. I mean, DTR went 24 of 47 for 170 yards with 2 turnovers. They made it to the red zone 3 times. They failed to get a touchdown on all 3 of them. They only settled for 3 points. And the strangest part about this game was that Miami had a sloppy game themselves. I mean, they committed 11 penalties. They were 2 for 11 on 3rd down. But Tyler Huntley, he only threw 4 incompletions. He was essentially a game manager. And even with no semblance of a running game, he at least did the bare minimum, which was stay out of the way and just make sure you get a couple touchdowns on the board. And that is exactly what happened. The Baltimore Ravens, they are coming off a 31-2 demolition over the Houston Texans. The only reason why Houston even scored in the first place was because their defense miraculously tackled Derrick Henry in the end zone for a safety when they were pinned inside the 5-yard line because Houston's offense turned the ball over on downs. But outside of that, I mean, the Houston Texans just got completely destroyed from start to finish. C.J. Stroud, he got sacked 5 times. He only threw for 185 yards. He threw an interception. They only had 10 first downs. They were 4 for 15. They had 86 total yards in the second half. And Baltimore's offense was just as efficient as balanced as you could ask for. Lamar Jackson had 255 total yards from offense. He scored 3 times. And even though with Derrick Henry had that costly play that gave Houston 2 points, he still ran for close to 150 yards on 26 more carries. So really, they were just pretty much unstoppable from start to finish. And the only good thing that happened in Houston that day was the freaking halftime show with Beyonce. And then the minute it was over, everybody just went back to being miserable. So this game, like I said, between the Ravens and the Browns, this is not going to go well. I think it's going to be a shutout, if we're being quite honest with you, because Ravens are simply here to take care of business. And the Browns, they don't have a quarterback. I mean, apparently the rumors are that they're going to try to play both Dorian Thompson-Robinson and Bailey Zappi. And if that's the case, then, dear God, they'll be lucky to even get 3 points on the board, let alone, 7, because Nick Chubb's out the year with a broken foot. David Njoku missed last week's game because of a hamstring injury. I mean, Jerry Jeudy's pretty much the only consistent wide receiver they've got. Their O-line is still a wreck. And the defense, like I said countless times, they have been worse since last year. So, long story short, I'm just going to pick the Ravens here, 34-0. And honestly, nobody's really going to pay attention to that one because the game right after that is going to be more intriguing between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Steelers are already in the playoffs, so they really just need a win and a Baltimore loss to clinch the AFC North. But the Cincinnati Bengals, for them to stay alive in the playoff hunt, they need a lot of things to go right for them. They need a win, first of all. They need the Broncos to lose to Kansas City, and they need the Dolphins to lose to the Jets, which is a pretty tall task to handle. So I don't know if Cincinnati's going to get all 3 of their wishes granted, but the first thing that they really need to get done is make sure they beat Pittsburgh because the Steelers, they have been stumbling over the last 3 weeks, and that Christmas game against the Chiefs was just the latest indicator that they might get bounced out of the first round because they have struggled mightily on both sides of the football here. Russell Wilson, he got sacked 5 times by a Chiefs defense that didn't even have Chris Jones. And despite the fact that Pittsburgh ran for over 200 yards against this team, they only scored 10 points. They turned the ball over twice. They managed to get in the red zone 4 times and only scored on 1 of them. And it should have been 2 if it wasn't for a stupid holding call that wiped away a Jalen Warren touchdown. And, what ensued was an interception from Justin Reed. But really, the Steelers were just outmatched and outclassed from start to finish. Patrick Mahomes was phenomenal. Even with no running game and a makeshift offensive line, he threw for 320 yards and 3 touchdowns. Travis Kelce made history for getting 1,000 catches and breaking the Chiefs franchise record for most passing yards in a career, usurping Tony Gonzalez. So that was great for them. And honestly, if it weren't for 9 boneheaded penalties, the score would have been a lot worse because Pittsburgh kept setting themselves back drive after drive after drive, and the Chiefs just kept taking advantage of it, and they never took their foot off the gas. Even though it was only a 6-point game heading into the fourth quarter, they went on a 16-3 scoring run in the second half to essentially say, you know what, you're not going to take our shining moment. And as a result, Kansas City is now the number 1 seed in the AFC, and they have nothing to play for next week because, you know, they got a bye coming up. So the Cincinnati Bengals, on the other hand, they are coming off a very convincing victory over the Denver Broncos. Joe Burrow took a beating by getting sacked 7 times, but I mean, he stuck in there. He gutted it out, and he was a flat-out warrior from start to finish. But the best part about this victory was that he actually had some help along the way. But the thing was, it didn't start out pretty because on their first 2 drives, they got stopped on 4th down twice. Denver kicked a field goal on their opening drive, but Cincinnati was able to force 2 quick punts after Cincinnati failed to get points on the board on their first 2 possessions. And then the more that Denver stalled out of the first half, the better of an opportunity that Joe Burrow had of marching his team down the field to score a touchdown. And that's exactly what he did, because on their final drive of the half, they go boom, 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 boom. They go up ahead by 4 points, and they have plenty of life left. They have plenty of life entering the third quarter, but it was only a 4-point game, so it was far from over. So Cincinnati got the ball to start the third quarter. They, go right down the field once again, but they stall out. They have to kick a field goal, and both teams traded touchdowns back and forth. Cortland Sutton beats Johnny Newton on a fade or on an intermediate fade. And then, Joe Burrow marches right down the field, finds T. Higgins again to give Cincinnati the lead. And then when Denver gets the ball back, Bo Nix fires a deep shot down the left side of the field to Marvin Mims, and they tie the game up at 17. And when T. Higgins fumbled the football on the ensuing possession, I thought, oh, God, this is how they're going to lose. Because we've seen this movie time and time again where they just make that one mistake that determines the outcome and sets them back or sets their playoff chances, or makes their playoff chances just even slimmer. But Bo Nix gave Cincinnati a break by throwing a costly interception over the middle of the field to Jermaine Pratt, which allowed Jamar Chase to get in stride for a 38-yard pickup and for Joe Burrow to score the go-ahead touchdown with about maybe under 2 minutes left. So Bo Nix got the ball back. He had plenty of time left. All they needed was a touchdown to send the game into overtime. And 2 huge completions to Cortland Sutton got them into field goal range, but they faced 4th down and 1 at the 25-yard line. And with no other choice but to go for it, Nix fired a deep shot down the right side of the end zone, and Marvin Mims snagged the catch over 2 defenders for the touchdown. And Sean Payton, elected to go for the extra point. He wanted to send the game into overtime, and we got just that. I personally would have gone for 2 since they were on the road and they needed just 1 win to make the playoffs. But you know what? Cincinnati got the ball to start in overtime, and back-to-back sacks from Zach Allen forced Cincinnati to punt. So in hindsight, Sean Payton made a logical decision by trusting his defense to get 1 critical stop in overtime. But the huge issue was when Bo Nix got the ball on his first possession of the extra period, they went 3 and out. And Joe Burrow did everything he could on his next possession to set up a chip shot field goal for Cade York. And I'm thinking, all right, game's over. Cincinnati's going to stay alive. And then Cade York doinks the kick. It doinks off the post. It's no good. And Bo Nix gets a second shot. And I'm thinking to myself, dear freaking God, Cincinnati just doesn't want to freaking win. And Denver goes 3 and out again. And I'm thinking to myself, dear Lord, Joe Burrow, you better freaking win this game by yourself. Because if you're going to trust Cade York to make another field goal, or if you're going to let Zach Taylor take the ball out of your hands, then you probably don't deserve to win this game. But he finally said enough is enough, and he called game. Because 2 huge completions to Andre Yoshivas and T. Higgins set up 1st and goal at the 3-yard line. And that was when Burrow found Higgins on the short corner of the end zone for the game-winning touchdown. Joe Burrow finished the game with 412 yards and 4 touchdowns. Chase Brown had a healthy 67 yards. T. Higgins had a hat-trick touchdown performance along with 11 catches for 131 yards. Jamar Chase had over 100 on just 9 receptions. Even Mike Gesicki had 10 catches for 86 yards. And to be quite honest with you, if it weren't for a few stalled out drives in the red zone and, a couple other possessions or a few other possessions that didn't end the way that they thought they would, Cincinnati could have won this game handily, but it's just they did enough in the end. They capitalized on their opportunities. They minimized their mistakes, and Denver just failed to put it away when they had the chance. I mean, they only settled for 3 points in the first half. They couldn't get any points on the board in overtime that could have won them the game, and that's why their playoff chances or their playoff percentage odds are a lot lower than what they were last week. Now, all Denver needs is to beat Kansas City to win again, but at this point, who knows if that'll even happen, even with Carson Wentz starting for Kansas City. But I digress. For this game in Acrisure Stadium, it could really go either way. Either the Steelers can pick up where they left off in the first matchup and torch Cincinnati and force them to make countless and careless mistakes, or Cincinnati decides to get out of their own way and have another complete performance and pick up where they left off last week, where Joe Burrow is putting the team on his back and where the defense actually pulls together a few stops to save the team from despair or to save them from elimination. So I think the Bengals will win. I don't think it's going to be a sweep like it was last year. Joe Burrow's healthy. The offense is finally starting to get into a groove. The defense has slightly improved over the last few weeks. And the Steelers, they've lost 3 in a row. Their defense is starting to look very vulnerable, and the offense is getting exposed. Because if you put the ball in Russell Wilson's hands and if you force him to beat him by himself, then you're not going to get the most promising results unless you're going up against a very terrible defense. So who knows? Maybe Pittsburgh will bounce back because Cincinnati still has a lot of flaws on both sides of the ball. But if the Cincinnati Bengals want their season to have any shot of staying alive heading into, next week in the wild card round, then they cannot afford to stumble into another pathetic defeat, or else, massive changes are going to be made. And I'm sure that Mike Brown, the owner, does not want to make those decisions, but he has no other choice. So I'm going to pick the Bengals here 23-20. I think it'll be a really decisive game. I think both offenses will throw in a couple punches, but if you put the ball in Joe Burrow's hands in the last minute of the game, if TJ Watt is not firing off the edge, then just watch out, because Joe Burrow is not the person that you want to bet against when the money is on the line. Just going to put it on the record right now. All right, now we're heading into Sunday's festivities. We're heading into the 1 o'clock window, which means the games that will be played in this window are not going to be particularly important, or they won't have any postseason implications. Maybe for teams that are tanking for a higher draft pick, possibly, but you know what? I digress. Let's head into this game between the Houston Texans and the Tennessee Titans. Houston's already clinched the division, so my guess is they're probably going to play Case Keenum and their backups, while the Tennessee Titans are planning to play both Mason Rudolph and Will Levis, which we all know that's probably going to backfire on them, because when has a 2-quarterback platoon approach ever worked out for a football team, where they just try to rotate these guys in and out of snaps? Unless you're the freaking Dallas Cowboys of the 70s, where they try to, rotate Roger Staubach and Craig Morton and end up winning a Super Bowl that year. You're not going to do that if your team is garbage. I'm sorry. It doesn't work anymore. So Houston, I already talked about, they're coming off a pathetic defeat, 31-2. They're most likely getting bounced out of the first round unless they somehow miraculously beat Pittsburgh if they meet each other in the wild card round. The Titans, on the other hand, they got swept by the Jacksonville Jaguars. They lost 20-13. They were down 13-0 at one point in the second quarter before Matthew Wright kicked a field goal to make it a 10-point game. The defense gave up a score on 3 of the first 4 drives. And while Mason Rudolph did lead an 8-minute touchdown drive to begin the second half, Mac Jones responded with one of his own that lasted 9 minutes. That pushed the Jacksonville lead to 10. And really, the biggest reason why Jacksonville lost, or why Jacksonville won, I should say, is because they made the least amount of mistakes. I mean, Mason Rudolph threw an interception in the second quarter, and when he did have a chance to continue the game even further, or potentially, send it into overtime, or who knows, maybe even win it, they just fell flat. They got stopped on 4th down at the 26-yard line. They settled for a field goal after Mac Jones pulled up that 9-minute touchdown drive, and they couldn't capitalize on their chances. And without Tony Pollard on their offense, they just couldn't respond, and they couldn't figure out a way to get points on the board. So, honestly, it could really go either way, to be quite honest with you, because C.J. Stroud might not play, the starters might not play, and Tennessee is just looking for a pity victory by any means necessary. They're at home, and, who knows? They're probably going to, make some big changes in the offseason. So, I don't know. I don't really know who's going to win. I don't think it really matters since it's the 1 o'clock game, but hold on, I dropped my pen. I would say it's interesting. I'll go with the Texans, but I think it's going to be a sloppy, boring game. And like I said, I don't really know if anybody's going to really pay attention to it. So I'll say the Texans win 13-10. Who knows? If C.J. Stroud does play, then that will be very questionable because you've already got the division locked up. You're most likely going to be the 4th seed. What's the point? That's all I'm going to say on that one. On that, though. Next up, we got the Atlanta Falcons versus the Carolina Panthers. Atlanta needs a win and a Tampa Bay Buccaneers loss to clinch the NFC South. But you know what would have really helped the odds? If they had beaten the Washington Commanders. Michael Penix put up a strong performance. After throwing an interception on an opening drive to set up an early Washington touchdown, the Falcons scored 17 unanswered points to take a 10-point lead at halftime. The Commanders kept setting themselves back with an interception and a bunch of holding penalties. But Jaden Daniels got the ball to start the second half. He was only down by 10. And really their approach was dominate the time of possession. And to begin the second half, they led 2 straight touchdown drives for a combined 15 minutes. That allowed them to score 14 unanswered points to take a 4-point lead early in the 4th quarter. And when Atlanta had a chance to push their lead even further, they just stalled out for punts. They had 9 plays, and they totaled only 14 yards. And that allowed Washington to jump right back into the ball game. But to Atlanta's credit, when Washington had a chance to potentially put the game away, a holding penalty forced Washington to kick a field goal. It was still a 7-point game. And when Penix got the ball back, he converted on not 1, but 2 4th down attempts to keep the Falcons alive. And the second one just happened to be the game-tying touchdown pass to Kyle Pitts, who last week dropped a wide-open pass that led to an interception by Cordell Fly. So took a little bit of time for Kyle Pitts to get redemption, but when it mattered the most, he made the catch that sent the game into overtime. Well, not send it into overtime, but tie the game up heading into the 4th quarter, because when Jaden Daniels got the ball back, they went 3 and out in just 40 seconds. So Michael Penix had plenty of time to, drive right into field goal range. And even though they didn't have Younghoe Koo, as long as you got within striking distance, you were going to be in good shape. But on the first play of the final drive of regulation, Michael Penix finds Darnell Mooney inbounds with 33 seconds left. They get to their own 40-yard line, but Raheem Morris, who I thought could be a candidate for Coach of the Year early in the year, doesn't use either of his 2 timeouts and lets the clock run all the way down to 16 seconds before running another play. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, that's probably going to cost you the game, because even if Penix gets into quote-unquote field goal range, and by that I mean somewhere between 50 and 58 yards, then you pretty much just wasted yourselves, 17 seconds left to get into easier range, to potentially set up a 40-yarder, something that most NFL kickers would make daily, on a daily basis, whether it's in a game or in practice. And to Penix's credit, he got within distance. It was a 57-yard field goal, which was a long attempt, and it had the distance. It looked like it was going to just get inside the uprights, but it fell just short of the crossbar, and we headed into overtime. And the minute that Jaden Daniels won the coin toss, I knew it was going to be game over, because you put the ball in his hands, he was going to, just put the team on his back, and that's exactly what he did. And just like he did on the first 2 drives of the 3rd quarter or in the second half, he milked off as much time off the clock as possible. They walked right down the field, and he capped off the drive with the touchdown pass to Zach Ertz to win the game. Jaden Daniels threw for 227 yards and 3 touchdowns. He took off 16 times for 127 yards, and he also got sacked 5 times. So he took a beating, but he never gave up. He never backed down, and Atlanta just really fell apart when they couldn't afford to on both sides of the ball. So now they're going up against the Carolina Panthers team that got completely blown out by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'll talk more about it from Tampa Bay's perspective later, but even with a couple of punches thrown from Bryce Young to Adam Thielen to keep things somewhat competitive, they were just flat out dominated on both sides of the ball from start to finish. I mean, Baker Mayfield threw for close to 360 yards and 5 touchdowns. Mike Evans had 97 yards, along with a couple touchdowns on 8 receptions. They ran for 200 yards. They were 10 for 14 on third down. They totaled 560 yards of offense, and they held the ball for 41 minutes, which was flat out absurd. And in the second half, Carolina's offense just got completely shut down. I mean, Bryce Young only threw for 43 yards or 49 yards. Adam Thielen only caught 1 pass, and they only picked up 5 first downs. So Tampa Bay's defense, they made a lot of solid adjustments out of the locker room to begin the third quarter, and they just proved that they were just the way stronger football team. And the minute that Tampa Bay blocked the punt in the middle of the third quarter to go up 41-14, I'm just like, you know what? This game's over. You know what? Tampa just only needs one more win to clinch the division. But more on them later, because there's one play that I really want to bring up, but I just wanted to save it for the Bucs game. So heading into this game at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, I think Atlanta's going to win. I mean, Carolina's offense is not the same when it doesn't have Chuba Hubbard, and their defense already can do so much. They've had 5 straight games where they've given up 200 rushing yards, and now you're going up against an Atlanta attack with Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier, and a passing game that includes Darnell Mooney, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts. So I don't really know how Carolina is going to be able to overcome the deficiencies they have, unless Bryce Young decides to have a perfect passer rating against the Falcons defense that's just been middle of the pack at best. So I'll say Atlanta wins this game. I'll say they win 30-17 because they're at home. And like I said, they need a win and a Buccaneers loss to win the division. So they're going to be desperate by any means necessary to get the victory on their hands. So now we get into this Bucs and Saints game at Raymond James Stadium. The Saints, they lost 25-10 to the Las Vegas Raiders. They showed some fight early on. I mean, Spencer Rattler threw a touchdown or 30-yard touchdown pass to Foster Moreau on a flea flicker. They were only down by 3 at halftime, but the offense got shut down in the second half. Spencer Rattler completed just 9 of 23 passes for 72 yards with 2 interceptions. He got sacked 3 times. And, the Raiders, they didn't really look too impressive since, they really had nothing to play for. But Aiden O'Connell was efficient. He threw for over 240 yards with a couple touchdowns. Amir Abdullah had his first career 100-plus yard game. He had over 145 yards from scrimmage. And Brock Bowers set the rookie tight end reception record with 7 catches as he caught 7 passes for 77 yards. And he beat Mike Ditka's record to take the top spot. So, there was nothing really to take away from the Saints game. Their offense completely shut down. They picked up 13 first downs. They were 1 for 10 on third down. 8 of the 10 penalties they committed were on the offensive side of the ball. And the more that they struggled, the more worn out their defense became. And really, the Raiders just showed more fight than the Saints did, bottom line. And Tampa, I already brought it up. Baker Mayfield was just flat out sensational. 5 touchdown passes. He won Player of the Week. He finished the game with 359 yards. The Bucs offense ran for 200. Mike Evans, he's only 85 yards away from reaching the 1,000-yard mark for the 11th straight year of his career. 10 for 14 on third down, 41 minutes time of possession, 560 yards. The defense didn't allow a single point in the second half, but my favorite play was on the special teams, because in the middle of the third quarter, Carolina's offense went 3 and out, and they were forced to punt the ball deep in their own territory. It was then when a duck casually flew into the stadium and just landed right next to the punt returner. And the minute that the Jumbotron panned over to that side of the field, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka blocks the kick from Johnny Hekker, and it's recovered for a scoop and score by J.J. Russell to give the Tampa Bay Buccaneers a 41-14 lead. And when the ball boy tried to lead the Duck off the field, every single fan in the stadium, even the 10 Panthers fans that decided to show up, just chanted, Ducky, Ducky, Ducky. And it was just a flat-out amazing moment. It was definitely better than the freaking Jumbotron at the Jaguars game, showing the freaking mascot getting knocked out by a Titans player, which I don't even want to know why the hell that's even a thing. But Tampa was the better team from start to finish. They were incredibly mad from last week, as Mike Evans said, when they lost in heartbreaking fashion to the Dallas Cowboys. And they took out all their pent-up aggression and frustration, anger and frustration, on a Panthers team that just really had nothing to play for besides some pity revenge for Dave Canales. So I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to win easily in this one. If you remember in their last matchup, Tampa Bay put up 50 points. They were absolutely sensational in all three phases. And with how wrecked the Saints are on both sides of the ball, I just don't know if they're going to have enough energy or enough heart to, stay alive in the race. Or not stay alive in the race, but to beat the Bucs at their own game. I know that they did it last year, but that was when New Orleans was healthy. They're nowhere near that. So I'll say the Buccaneers win the NFC South once again with a final score of 37-6. All right, next up, we got the Buffalo Bills versus the New England Patriots. Neither team has anything to play for, and both teams are coming off blowout games, but on opposite sides. The Patriots got destroyed 40-7 by the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Bills, they gave Aaron Rodgers a final send-off into the sunset. I mean, I know they have another game next week, but, I mean, you could just tell that Aaron Rodgers, it's time for him to, retire, because that was flat-out disgraceful, what we saw. He finished with a QBR of 1.2. They were down 40-0 before he took himself out. He threw for only 112 yards with 2 interceptions, 16 penalties for 120 yards. That's disgraceful, and that was just disgusting. And Josh Allen didn't even throw for that many yards, but he didn't even need to be the hero. They were efficient. They were balanced. Josh Allen still scored 3 touchdowns. They scored 38 points. They were 8 for 14 on third down. And you know what? 40-0 in midway through the fourth quarter was enough. So they just showed that they were the stronger football team, and they had way bigger aspirations for the future, which is honestly saying a lot. But being quite honest, I mean, Josh Allen's going to start, but only for like a drive or two because the Bills have nothing to play for. They've already clinched the second seed, and they already won the division. So really, it's going to be Mitchell Trubisky for the entire afternoon. Drake May is going to play, but I don't know how long, because Joe Milton apparently is going to be the backup quarterback. He's going to get some reps, so I don't know. That'll be interesting, I guess. So really, I don't know. Maybe the Patriots will win. Maybe they'll try to end their season on a high note, but I mean, who knows? Buffalo's mainly going to be playing with backups on both sides of the ball, and New England came close to beating them 2 weeks ago, so who knows? Maybe I actually will pick the Patriots. It's not going to mean anything, but you know what? If they want to screw up their own tank and cost themselves with the number 1 overall pick, then so be it. Because to be quite honest, I don't really care which direction they go in, because unless they actually do something in free agency and make a huge splash for a game-changing player, then there's not a lot of hope that you can have for this football team. So I'll say the Patriots win 27-14, and Titans, Browns, you might have a chance of the number 1 overall pick if you lose your respective games. So thank you for that. So you're welcome for that. Okie dokie. Next up, we got the Jacksonville Jaguars versus the Indianapolis Colts. Oof. Wow. Just wow. First of all, I don't even need to talk about the Jaguars game. They won. They're not gonna have a top 5 pick. I already talked about them. The Colts, oh boy. I don't even know what's more humiliating. The fact that the Giants screwed up their tank and cost themselves of having the number 1 overall pick, or the Colts getting eliminated from playoff contention by the worst team in football. I mean, don't get me wrong. I didn't think they were going to make the postseason anyways because they're just not that good, and they were going to get bounced out if they somehow fluked their way in. But dear Lord, that was as humiliating of a defeat as you could ask for. And it's not the first time that something like this has happened, because if you remember 3 years ago, they were only a win away from making the playoffs with Carson Wentz at quarterback, and they only needed one win in their final 2 games against the Raiders and the Jaguars to make it in, and they lost both of those games. The next year, obviously, that was a different story in and of itself because Frank Reich got fired, Matt Ryan looked washed, they had to start freaking Nick Foles and Sam Ehlinger, and they went 4-13. So we don't even need to take that year into consideration. But the next year, you're against the Houston Texans at home. You just need one more touchdown to win the game, and Tyler Goodson drops a wide open pass in the flat, and the Houston Texans hold on to win the division while the Colts get eliminated from the playoffs. And now you have this. Joe Flacco started because of a back injury to Anthony Richardson, and it didn't even matter because the minute that Flacco threw an interception on his opening drive, I'm thinking to myself, oh boy, it's going to be one of those games. And sure enough, the Giants never took their foot off the gas, despite the fact that Indianapolis was only down by 8 at halftime and 2, midway through the third quarter and parts of the fourth. Because Drew Lock had a perfect passer rating in the first half. He finished with 5 touchdowns. Malik Neighbors caught 7 passes for 171 yards and 2 scores of himself. And Joe Flacco turned the ball over 3 times. And more importantly, when Amir Smith-Marset began the second half with a touchdown on a 100-yard kickoff return, I'm just thinking to myself, what in the world is going on? Like, Indianapolis' defense was pathetic. Their offense fumbled the ball away on countless opportunities to stay alive in the game. And, I mean, they deserve to get eliminated from playoff contention because we knew that the Colts never deserved to be in this spot in the first place. But the fact that they lost to a 2-13 Giants team that had the first overall pick that recently just got destroyed 34-7 to the Atlanta Falcons, whose offense has been pathetic all season long and whose defense has been decimated with a combination of injuries and ineffectiveness. That is probably the most humiliating way to get eliminated from playoff contention, probably since the Jaguars fans decided to dress up as clowns before their team forced Carson Wentz to have one of the worst games of his career, to be quite honest with you. So I honestly don't know which one is worse, but Jonathan Taylor deserves to go to a real team. Like, he deserves so much better than whatever the hell we just saw on Sunday afternoon. Good God. And by the way, Drew Lock had the best QBR out of any other quarterback in the National Football League. 99. That's despite the fact that Jonathan Taylor ran for 125 yards and Joe Flacco throwing for 330 yards and 2 touchdowns because they pissed away multiple opportunities to get an expected victory. And instead, it's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, upsets of the entire season. So, I mean, I'll pick the Colts since they're at home, but this is going to be a total crapshoot. Both teams are freaking disastrous. They're both garbage, and both of them need to make a lot of wholesale changes at the beginning of the offseason. Shane Steichen went from a promising Coach of the Year candidate last year, and now he's on the hot seat. Chris Ballard, his seat is definitely on fire. And Gus Bradley, the defensive coordinator, he should have been let go a long time ago. So I'll say the Colts win. I'll say they win 27-13, but yeah, Colts need to blow up everything. And the Jaguars, I mean, they've been dead for months. So we all know that nothing's going to change if they decide to keep around Doug Peterson or Trent Baalke or even both. So who knows? Both of them have terrible owners. So I don't expect too much to happen besides, power grabbing and backstabbing. So, all right. Next up, we got the Washington Commanders versus the Dallas Cowboys. Already talked about Washington. Jaden Daniels was a freaking warrior. He led the Atlanta Falcons to a 30-24 victory over the Atlanta Falcons. But the Dallas Cowboys, they got pummeled by the Philadelphia Eagles 41-7. Cooper Rush threw 2 interceptions. One of them, the pick 6 to C.J. Gardner-Johnson on the opening drive. Saquon Barkley, not only did he run for over 165 yards on 30 touches, but he became the 9th player in NFL history to run for 2,000 yards in a season. Kenny Pickett, he scored 2 touchdowns before getting hurt. And even though Tanner McKee in fill-in duty only attempted 4 passes, 3 of them were completions and 2 of those were touchdowns. So without CeeDee Lamb, with him on injured reserve because of a shoulder injury, I mean, their offense was one-dimensional. There was nobody to really throw the ball to besides Brandon Cooks and, Jalen Tolbert to tie the ball game up at 7 in the first quarter. But, I mean, the Philadelphia Eagles were just the better team. They shut the Cowboys down on almost every single facet. And Dallas, after beating the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at home last week, they fell back down to earth, and reality slapped them really big in the face. So Washington doesn't really have anything to play for. They've already locked up a playoff spot. They're mainly going to be the 6th or 7th seed in the playoffs because the 5th spot will either go to Detroit or Minnesota since they have 14 wins, which is flat out absurd that one of them is going to be the 5th seed. But I digress. Mike McCarthy, he declined to comment if Cooper Rush was going to be the starting quarterback. And it looks like Marcus Mariota is going to start for Washington since, like I said, they don't really have anything to play for. But it could really go either way. I'm going to pick Washington just so they could get some revenge from the last time these two teams played against each other. If they could just stay poised and disciplined on all 3 phases, not just their offense, but the defense and special teams as well, then they're going to be fine. I don't expect this to be too much of a too close of a contest, but I don't expect things to get completely out of hand at the same time. So, in terms of a final score, with Marcus Mariota at quarterback, I'll say the Commanders win 19-17. It's a weird score, but who knows? Let's roll the dice. All right, next up, we got the Philadelphia Eagles versus the New York Giants. Philly is resting all of their starters. The Giants are trying to contend for the number 1 overall pick. New York hasn't won a game in Philadelphia in who knows how long. It's felt like forever since they actually got a win in Philadelphia. So I'm not going to do the fact-checking right now since I want to just get this game over with. But this is interesting because Philadelphia is mainly going to start Tanner McKee. They're not going to play any of their starters. And the Giants, who knows? With Brian Daboll as their head coach, I don't even know if they even want to tank anymore. I think they just want to win to end their season on a high note. So I'll pick the Giants just because, I don't know. I don't really know what to expect from Tanner McKee. He did okay last week, but all they really needed to do was just hand the ball off to Saquon Barkley and just make sure you find A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith if they're open. So with those 2 guys out of the picture for this game, I'm not sure if the Eagles are going to win this game just because I don't really trust their backup depth on offense. I think their defense could potentially carry them to a victory, but I don't know. With the Giants, at least you got Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson and Tyrone Tracy. You have decent guys on offense, but you don't know who to trust on the defensive side. So could really go either way, to be quite honest with you, but I'll pick the Giants 16-10. I'll say they end their trend, but it's not going to really mean anything because the Eagles already clinched the 2nd seed. They already won the division last week, and they don't really have anything to play for. They just got to hope that they play an easier opponent so that they could get far in the playoffs. So that's all I'll say on this matter. Next up, we got the Green Bay Packers versus the Chicago Bears. Dear Lord, both of them are coming off pretty deflating losses, but the Bears, that game on Thursday night, that was the worst I've ever watched all season long. Neither team scored a touchdown. Nobody put points on the board in the second half, yet the Seahawks won by a score of 6-3 because Caleb Williams got sacked 7 times, and when he had a chance to unfortunately send this game into overtime, he threw the game-ending interception to Reek Woolen and give the Bears their 10th straight loss of the season. The Seahawks were just as bad themselves. Geno Smith only threw for 160 yards. He got sacked 3 times. Like I said, no touchdowns scored and 0 points in the second half. But you know what? The only reason why they won was because they weren't the Bears. Like, that's the thing. And their defense was flat out unstoppable with their pass rush. But like I said, Seahawks offense, let me pull up my notes here. 3 first downs in the second half, 57 total yards of offense, 5 for 13 on third down for the whole game, and it took 2 field goals to somehow beat this team. And thank goodness they're not in the playoffs. They got eliminated via tiebreaker because they are just so freaking inconsistent, at least on the offensive side. Defensively, we know that they're going to have a lot of energy to try to keep this team competitive, but their offense, with that much talent and, with that much potential, they just keep finding ways to barely escape football games and somehow, some way, stumble into ugly defeats. So I'll pick the game for the Seahawks and the Rams later, since the Rams already clinched the division. But when it comes to the Packers versus the Bears, yeah, the Green Bay Packers got swept by the Minnesota Vikings. They were down 27-10 in the fourth quarter to Sam Darnold, who finished with 347 yards and 3 touchdown passes. But they went on a furious rally. They went on a 15-0 run in the fourth quarter to cut their deficit to 2. And unfortunately, it was too little too late because Jordan Love only threw for 60 yards before the final 2 drives of the game. Josh Jacobs fumbled the football on the opening drive and got held to 8 yards in the second half. Their defense got torched for most of the ball game. And when they had a chance to get one last stop on the final possession, they gave up the 2 first downs that were needed to run out the clock. So we know that Green Bay is a promising playoff contender, but the thing is, we don't know if they're we don't even know. We definitely know that they're not as great as the Vikings or the Lions or the Philadelphia Eagles, because while they do their best to keep things competitive, for whatever reason, they just can't finish the job and they can't finish the deal, which is why their ceiling is the second round. But I think in this game at Lambeau Field, with or without Jordan Love, because they've already clinched a playoff spot and they're most likely going to be the 6th or 7th seed, I'm going to pick the Packers to win. I think that Green Bay still owns Chicago, regardless if Aaron Rodgers is still there or not. And Malik Willis is going to be the starter, but he's proven to be very decent this year in his first couple of starts against the Titans and the Colts, and then in fill-in duty against the Jaguars when Jordan Love hurt his groin. So I'll say the Green Bay Packers, they win this game pretty convincingly. I'll say they get it done 24-10. Because like I said, they're at home. I love their running game. I think that's going to be their dominant point of attack. And defense, even with Jair Alexander out for the season, they've at least proven that they are capable of shutting down below average offenses. And that's putting it nicely because this is the Bears we're talking about. Okie dokie. Now we get to the Seattle Seahawks versus the Los Angeles Rams. LA beat the Arizona Cardinals 13-9 once again because of a defensive effort and a sluggish offensive attack. I mean, I am really worried about this Rams offense because ever since they beat the Buffalo Bills 44-42 and exploded, it seems like they've been figured out. And this game against the Cardinals was no different because Matthew Stafford in the first half went 8 of 20 for 123 yards. He finished the game with 189 yards. In the second half, they only scored 3 points and picked up 4 first downs. And while they did enough by taking a 10-0 lead at halftime, because the defense sacked Kyler Murray 3 times and forced a 4th-down stop, it felt like the Rams were just doing everything they could to be like, all right, Arizona, you can have one more shot to close the deal and pull off the upset and quite possibly ruin our playoff hopes. But to LA's defensive, I can't even phrase it right. To the defense's credit, they said, yeah, no, we're not losing this game by any means necessary. After they let Kyler Murray walk down the field and score a touchdown on their opening possession, which, by the way, was the first touchdown of the season for Trey McBride, the special teams made the most underrated play of the night by blocking the extra point to make it a 4-point game. Both teams traded field goals on their next couple of possessions. And when Kyler Murray had 2 chances to pull off the upset and close the deal, he ended those drives with 2 god-awful interceptions. One on 4th down at the Rams 40, where he heaved the ball deep into double coverage. And the next one bounced off the helmet of Trey McBride at the 5-yard line, and it got snagged out of the air by Ahkello Witherspoon. So That's all. That's what it took for the Rams to hold on for victory. Arizona made it into the red zone 4 times, only cashed in once. 2 interceptions at the end and 9 penalties. So they just kept getting in their own way time and time again when the Rams were giving them countless opportunities to try and do something about it. So Jimmy Garoppolo is going to get the start. The Rams are going to rest all their starters since they've already won the division. And we thought that this was going to be a very impactful game a few weeks ago. And now it's completely meaningless for both sides. So Jimmy Garoppolo will get the start for LA. For Seattle, I don't know if they're going to go with Geno Smith. Maybe they do decide to roll with him instead of Sam Howell. I would probably take the former course of action because we know what Sam Howell is, and it doesn't lead to promising results. But I'm going to pick Seattle here because I know that their defense still has a little bit of fight left in them. I know that Jimmy Garoppolo is definitely not the same quarterback that he was in 2019 when he helped the 49ers get to a Super Bowl. And more importantly, I mean, if Geno Smith is the starter and the Rams offense falters out time and time again, then it's only going to be a matter of time before Geno puts the team on his back once again and leads them to victory, even if it's completely meaningless. So I'll say the Seahawks win in a very close game, 24-20. All right, now we have, let's see, 5 games left to go. We got the Miami Dolphins versus the New York Jets. The Jets got blown out 40-14 by the Buffalo Bills. Aaron Rodgers was absolutely pathetic. Like I said earlier, a QBR of 1.2. They were down 40-0 when he was on the field. And the Dolphins, on the other hand, are coming off a pretty ugly but convincing victory over the Cleveland Browns, 20-3, depending on how you want to look at it. 11 penalties, 2 for 11 on third down, but it didn't even matter because Tyler Huntley threw 4 incompletions, and the biggest reason why they really won the football game is because A, they stayed out of the wrong way, and B, because the Browns don't have a quarterback. So entering this game, it could really go either way because we know that the Dolphins are nowhere near the same team without Tua Tagovailoa as they are when he is on the field, and the Jets are just an abominable disgrace. We're hearing reports that this could be Aaron Rodgers' last game as an NFL quarterback. And if that's the case, we'll definitely miss him as the player. But as the leader and as the teammate, we could have a different conversation about that at some point. But, you know, it's the final game at MetLife Stadium of the season. It's not going to be that entertaining of a game because, like I said, the Jets have been spinning in circles all season long. And the Dolphins, their offense is just not that great when it doesn't have Tua. So it could really go either way, in my opinion. But I think the Dolphins, they know what's at stake. They need a win and a Broncos loss for them to make the playoffs. And you know what? I think that they're going to generate a lot of passion. They're going to have a lot of energy, and they're going to have a lot of fight. And more importantly, they'll have more discipline than a New York Jets. So I'll say the Miami Dolphins stave off the Jets. I think it's probably going to be a double-digit victory for Miami. I'll say they win 23-10. But then again, the Jets nearly beat the Dolphins in the fourth quarter in the last matchup in South Beach. So I could be wrong, but, I mean, what else is there to hope for with the New York Jets besides actual change and positive growth? And honestly, that's just praying constantly for that just requires deep and thoughtful prayer because that team definitely needs it. The fact that they're even interviewing Rex Ryan and Ron Rivera for their next head coaching jobs, it just shows how pathetic of an organization and ownership group that they really have. I'm dead serious. All right, next up, we got the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Denver Broncos. Kansas City already clinched the number 1 seed, and the Broncos only need one more win to make the playoffs. It's not that huge of a game for Kansas City. They have nothing to play for, but for the Broncos, even if it's against Carson Wentz, they know that they cannot afford to lose this ball game, or else they could kiss the playoffs goodbye. So I'll say the Broncos win. They're at home. I think their defense will do everything they can to, keep Carson Wentz uncomfortable and give us flashbacks to what he was in his last year in Philadelphia, in his final 2 games with Indianapolis, and how his time with the Washington Commanders ended. So that's really what I think it's going to take. But also, Bo Nix actually had a pretty efficient performance the last time he went up against this Chiefs defense. He might not have to go up against Chris Jones or George Karlaftis or Trent McDuffie this time around, but Bo Nix has proven that he's improved week after week after week. And I think if he can step into the fire and try to, carry his team through the mess and lead them to glory, then that'll be enough. So I'll say the Broncos, because of the home field advantage, because of their offensive improvements, and because that their defense is still as potent of a unit as you can ask for them to be, I'll say they win. I'll say it's a close game, but I'll say they win 27-24. I'll say they do enough because, like I said, I trust their defense. I trust their offense against Kansas City's backups. Unless Andy Reid decides to play spoiler and have everybody play at 150% or give everything that they've got to win this game, even though they have a bye coming up. So, anyways, we've got the Los Angeles Chargers versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Vegas is coming off a pretty convincing victory over the New Orleans Saints to pull off their second straight victory, while the Chargers clinched the playoff berth by absolutely dismantling the New England Patriots 40-7. After their offense went 3-and-out on the opening possession, they scored on 8 of their next 9 drives. J.K. Dobbins came back from an MCL sprain and put up a healthy 76 yards on 17 touches, if I want to say. 76 yards on 19 touches, but the real star of the show was Justin Herbert. He threw for over 280 yards and 3 touchdowns, 10 for 17 on third down, held onto the ball for 41 minutes. And Ladd McConkey, who the Patriots actually had a chance to draft in the second round, goes off for 94 yards and 2 touchdowns on 8 catches. So, while Jalen Polk, the guy that New England decided to settle for when they traded down with LA, had 1 target and he dropped it. So, good for him. And Javon Baker didn't even play or barely even got the ball. Because right? I don't know. With how every game has gone for them, he's barely taken the field, or he's been a healthy scratch, or he's hardly been targeted. So honestly, he hasn't even caught a single pass all season. So you kind of forget if he's even been a part of the action. So that's why I stumbled there for a second. But the point is, Chargers don't really have anything to play for. I mean, Jim Harbaugh says they're going to go for the win. But the thing is, I think the Raiders are going to do everything they can to end their season on a high note, even though it's not going to spoil LA's playoff hopes since they already clinched a playoff spot. Over the last few seasons, I've definitely noticed a trend. The Chargers usually get the win against this team in SoFi Stadium, but when they play in Allegiant Stadium, the Raiders muster up enough juice and energy to pull off a very convincing upset. So I'm not sure. I don't think that trend is going to continue, unfortunately, because if Jim Harbaugh somehow, some way does decide to play a few key starters to give the team a lot of momentum heading into the wild card round, then I think the Chargers have enough resources to pull off the sweep. And because, listen, their defense knows how to shut down inferior offenses. And as long as you make sure that the offense stays out of their way, they're going to do enough to make sure that they stay in the driver's seat for most of the afternoon. So, in terms of a final score, I'll say the Chargers win 24-10. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be convincing, but all they need to do is just the bare minimum, and that'll be enough. So, all right, next up to conclude Sunday afternoon, we got the Arizona Cardinals versus the San Francisco 49ers. Well, the 49ers didn't really have anything to play for when they hosted the Detroit Lions on Monday Night Football, but it looked like they picked up right where they left off in the NFC Championship. I mean, they scored on 4 of their first 5 drives. Easily could have been all 5 if it weren't for a missed field goal by Jake Moody. They were up 21-13 at halftime and 28-21 in the fourth quarter or in the third quarter. And even though the Detroit Lions did everything they could to get points on the board and, stay in the game, it looked like the 49ers were absolutely unstoppable. And then 2 interceptions to Kirby Joseph from Brock Purdy swung the entire momentum of the game around. The Detroit Lions scored 13 points off of those turnovers. And when they took the lead, they never gave it up. And the worst part about it was that Brock Purdy, when he got sacked on a blitz by Bryant Branch, down 40-28, He re-aggravated the shoulder that he tore 2 years ago when they lost to the Philadelphia Eagles 38-7. And it's a good thing that the test came back negative, but it knocked him out of the game for the final 2 minutes and forced Josh Dobbs into the starting lineup. And they lost the game by 6, but they easily could have had 7 more if it weren't for 2 missed field goals and an extra point by Jake Moody, who has spiraled out of control over the last month or two, because this started up in Tampa when they barely beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because he missed 3 field goals in that one. And now he's got 9 misses and 3 more last week, or 3 more on Monday. So yeah, his job is on the line heading into next season. They might have to bring in kicking competition. I know that he had to deal with a groin injury and he missed a few games, but when your kicker goes south, he usually stays south. Unless you're Cairo Santos, it's very hard for players at that position to completely turn their entire careers around after this long of a slump. So we already talked about the Cardinals. They had multiple chances to beat the Rams, but 2 interceptions all but sealed the deal. Their offense got shut down in the first half. A blocked extra point made all the difference. And when their offense had a chance to win the game, they gifted it back to the Rams, and they cost themselves another winnable game, even with nothing to play for. So this game will be played at State Farm Stadium, and I think the 49ers will win, even with Josh Dobbs starting this game. Like I said, neither of these teams have anything to play for, but I doubt Arizona is going to sweep the 49ers. I know the Rams did that earlier this year, but I don't know if San Francisco wants to avoid the same humiliating fate twice in a season. And if that's the case, then this truly was a failure. Because you can blame the injuries all you want, but to go 6-11 and for everything to implode the way that it did after going to the Super Bowl last year, yeah, there's no excuse for that besides, but there's nobody else to blame but themselves. But at the end of the day, I'll say the 49ers win 31-20. All right, and last but not least, the game that we've all been waiting for, the Detroit Lions and the Minnesota Vikings in a race for the number 1 seed. The winner gets the division, gets home field advantage throughout the playoffs. The loser drops to the 5th seed in the playoffs, which is unbelievable, to be quite honest with you. But both of these teams stack up really well against each other. They both have incredible dynamic offenses, but Detroit's defense is incredibly injured. It's absolutely decimated. Thankfully, they're getting Alex Anzalone back from IR, after missing a lot of time with a fractured forearm. And the Vikings defense, it's definitely not been the most dominant unit, but they've had an interception they've had a takeaway in every single game they played this year. They're very opportunistic. They have a lot of playmakers at all 3 levels. And when it's time for them to go and when it's time for them to finish the job, all hands are on deck and nobody is left behind. So this is going to be an amazing grudge match. I have been looking forward to this for the last month now. It's going to be insanely close. I am expecting an offensive shootout from both sides. But I think the Vikings, they're going to split the series, and I actually think that they're going to win the division and get the home field advantage. I will not be sad, or I will not be upset if Detroit does it, because they need to win a lot more. Their defense is ravaged, and if they're forced to go on the road, then they're going to have a very tall task ahead of them, especially when you have to go up against the likes of Philadelphia and Minnesota and who knows, maybe even the Rams. But listen, I like the Vikings defense a lot better. And as long as their offense doesn't turn the ball over like Sam Darnold did in the 4th quarter, then they're going to make a lot more plays to get the job done. Sam Darnold has been phenomenal this year, and he deserves a contract extension. Justin Jefferson is still the best receiver in football. Jordan Addison might be the best number 2 option, or he's in that discussion along with T. Higgins. TJ Hawkinson, he's bounced back tremendously since tearing his ACL last year. Aaron Jones is questionable because of a quad contusion, but they still have a reliable offensive line. And like I said, their defense, I trust them down the stretch a lot more than I do with Detroit. So that's what I'm basing this off of. It could really go either way, but at the end of the day, it's going to be an outstanding game. We might stay up past midnight because I feel like it's going to go into overtime. But I'll say the Vikings win 41-38. That's how great of a game I think this was. And maybe I'm exaggerating it a little bit, but that's the best case scenario that I am hoping for. All right. Thank you all so much for watching. That wraps it up. Make sure you like and subscribe for additional content, and leave a comment down below. Who do you think is going to win, and how do you think your team's going to do? Thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you next week. Happy New Year. And, yeah, love you guys.